All right, welcome everybody to our Coffee and Compliance webinar. Today we're switching up formats. First half of the year, we largely were looking at EPA enforcement, regulatory trends, but today we've got a guest on our Coffee and Compliance, and we're going to be talking about air emissions and data technology in general, and just some of the considerations of how to use it, how to get the most value out of it. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ryan Janik. I'm one of the co-founders here at Mapistry, and I apologize again for the voice. As I was telling Kathryn, our guest, one of my vocal cords is paralyzed, so a little rough, but hopefully you all can hear me just fine. For those of you that don't know about Mapistry, we're an environmental compliance and data platform for tracking, monitoring, and analyzing environmental compliance, whether that be task tracking, corrective action tracking, all the way through digital inspections. And what the focus of today's webinar is around data and our new environmental data platform that we launched at the beginning of this month. So if you have more questions about the environmental data platform or Mapistry, feel free to reach out to me or anybody on the team. And with that, I want to introduce Kathryn Connolly. She's the managing consultant on the digital solution side for Trinity Consultants. Super excited to have Kathryn here. As I put in a note to many of you on here, I always learn so much chatting with Kathryn about like where companies are at from a data side technology, what's happening, what are some of the like trends, but also where are people struggling, where are people finding value and really turning around internally and showing that value for what they've invested in on the digital side. So really excited to have Kathryn here today to share some of her wisdom and knowledge around technology and data systems. So thanks for being on today, Kathryn.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited as well.
Cool. So I guess to kick things off, can you give a little background around what are the kinds of companies you typically work with on digital solutions and what types of air permits are you typically dealing with?
Yeah, so within Trinity and the digital solutions team as a whole, we typically work with clients who are pretty heavily regulated industries with rigorous EHS programs. So it's kind of our traditional client and air program that we're working with. But these days, really with the focus on sustainability metrics and decarbonization, the type of client looking to better understand and track their comprehensive air emissions, including greenhouse gas emissions, is really broadening. So we are seeing that client type really broaden beyond those more heavily regulated, heavy industry clients, which is exciting. And so we support clients too that have like more complex PSD permits or Title V permits, all the way to minor source permits. And we also work with clients to help them on the Trinity side, help them determine whether or not they need, what kind of permit they need, whether they need a permit or not. And on the sustainability front, kind of tying into that, helping them determine their baseline and overall decarbonization strategy. So it's really a wide breadth of work that we do in the air emission space, and the digital solution space spans all of that as well.
You mentioned about the sustainability. Do you see non-public or private companies, non-publicly traded companies moving into the sustainability reporting side, or is it largely still driven by the public markets?
No, definitely seeing it on the private side as well, either driven by private companies being a supplier to public companies, and so it's kind of coming from that driver of the public companies asking their suppliers for data and requesting more and more information for their own reporting and disclosures. But also I think there's just a general interest in having a better idea and investor pressure in understanding what your sustainability having a sustainability program in place and a path to decarbonization, and that's really, like, whether public or private, become a big driver for like clearly understanding your carbon emissions, at least as a starting point, to that decarbonization.
Yeah, it's been interesting, the shift over the past couple of years. We've seen it too on, like, it's not just an ESG public company thing anymore, but like you said, it's private companies and that ripple effect getting pushed down the supply chain. And even some, I think, we work with some companies on the more innovative side that they see it as a sales and marketing, like a value add to customers, and using it more forcefully out in the markets as almost like a value prop that positions them against other companies. So it's interesting how people have used that, and it's pretty cool to see some pretty innovative and sustainable companies out there take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Um, I guess, yeah, I guess to do that, like, how are they running those programs today? Like, how do they accomplish this? Because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, so I think there's really still a mixed bag, especially on the sustainability front. We're very much still in this transition phase, and people are just trying to get their programs like grounded and the core like sustainability data underfoot and understood internally. But on the air emissions program, I mean, those people have had to, companies have had to calculate their air emissions for ages now, and report those. So that's been around for a while. And Excel has definitely been a very appealing tool for companies to use, and because of its flexibility and accessibility. But it does start to show its weaknesses, and I think the places where we're starting to see it show its weaknesses more and drive clients to look for a software solution for their air emissions program, is really when you start to have lots of different data sources that need to go through data validation. There's more scrutiny on data quality. Some of that is driven by sustainability as well. You have to report your emissions to leadership quarterly or monthly. So as we're seeing more and more interest in calculating air emissions on a more frequent basis, it used to be an annual exercise that you did for reporting purposes to whatever state or federal agency you had to report that data to, and you did it, you checked the box and moved on until the next year. But we're really seeing a transition to calculating those emissions on a monthly or quarterly basis to truly understand and be a little more proactive on the air emissions front, rather than just reactive on an annual basis. The other thing that Excel, where Excel starts to show its weaknesses, and using a digital tool or software solution can really help, is analyzing trends and having more of that ongoing real-time data analysis. So with a software solution, you can start to look at year-over-year emissions. You can start to compare March 2023 to March 2022 and see what that comparison looks like, and that can really uncover and reveal some great information to environmental professionals to go address with their operations team, or to make sure that the data that they're receiving is high quality. So all of those things are starting to push people more and more towards using software and trying to automate the data collection, the data transformation, and leveraging business intelligence tools to really dig into that data. So yeah, I think we're seeing it trend from this annual process to a more frequent calculation process, and then starting to use our tools, the tools accessible to us, in some better ways to automate the processes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I once heard it referred to as the 50 spreadsheet shuffle at the end of the year of like, let's run our reports, let's normalize the data, quick cram it through. Hopefully it's right, rather than, like you said, validating that in real time and actually having visibility. One follow-up question on that is there was a bunch of money for environmental justice and third-party groups in the Infrastructure Act and a bunch of the recent legislation, and that's been a rising trend. How much do you see companies using digital solutions internally because outside parties or regulatory agencies are also using more and more tools themselves? Do you see that as part of a defensive or offensive strategy to have that data in real time, or how do you see those interactions happen?
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely haven't heard that as like the core driver so much for digitizing, but I think it inherently is as well. Similar to the idea of having to provide data readily to leadership on a quicker basis. I think that's the very similar driver in terms of external parties, whether it's a regulatory agency showing up on your doorstep, or yeah, some of these other third-party environmental groups scrutinizing the data more. There definitely just across the board is a higher level of scrutiny on this data, which is really driving the interest in collecting it more frequently, validating it more frequently, having a way to get third parties in there to do verification and reviews and audits of the program. So all of that, it collectively is definitely driving the interest in digitizing air emissions.
Yeah, that response rate time is just so much higher than, I
Yeah.
mean, we talk about it of like you open a spreadsheet on a site and it's like 6 months have gone by and there's no data in there. And it's like, how do you respond to any kind of inquiry, internal or external?
Yep. And the time lost then going to figure out how to respond is significant. And I think that's more of the interest as well. Like, we want our environmental professionals spending time on strategy and risk management, not on tracking someone down for data that should have been received 3 months ago. So it's, yeah, just using their time valuing their time and using it well. And a digital solution that helps automate those data collection processes and validation processes can really support that.
Yeah, the value out of, I think the environmental profession will shift with more and more digital tools to not just being the person that puts it in the spreadsheet, but the person that looks at, like you said, what were we doing last quarter or a year ago, and how can we make changes to standard limits or improve processes? So, no, it's really, really interesting. I guess switching to more tactical, what's your process or Trinity's process for helping company pick, deploy, and ultimately get value out of a digital solution? How does that work?
Yeah, so we have a couple, so we do support clients with software selection and finding a tool that will work best for them. Before I dive into our process, I'll just say that Trinity as a company, so and within the digital solutions team, we're software agnostic. So we want to find the tool that is going to best meet our clients' needs with no other agenda in there. And so we typically follow a 3-step process for software selection. So that is really doing a needs assessment. And this is something, whether you work with a vendor or a consultant, I really highly recommend people do this needs assessment step internally. I think it's something that we all think about when we're going to make a big purchase or investment. We should know what are our drivers, what's the scope that we're looking to address. And most importantly, I think, is looking at the current state of your program and what you want that future state to really look like. And so we kind of tease this out with clients via a workshop session where we really just ask lots of questions. And so an example might be like, what's the granularity of the data that you're collecting today? What do you want that to be in the future? And understanding that current state versus future, we can start to have conversations about, okay, how do we actually get you there? What are we going to set up an integration to meet those needs? And does the tool need to be able to ingest hourly data, or does it just need to be able to ingest monthly, quarterly, annual data? So really digging into those needs can lead us to a clear set of requirements. And so ultimately, you want to it's helpful to come to the table when looking for software with a list of your core requirements, and that can include some nice to haves as well, so things that you really would like the software to do for you as well. And typically we'll lead clients through a bit of a scoring process with that aligns the requirements with some key scoring criteria that then they can use to help facilitate their own note-taking and ingestion of software demonstrations. And so there's a lot of small nuances between software vendors out there on the market today. And so this kind of approach, while the scoring doesn't often give you the final answer right away, it can help just with those differentiations and help clients document some initial reactions to the demo. And so that's typically the process that we follow for helping a company pick a solution. When it comes to implementing and deploying, that's where all the fun starts, and it's a good time. So we like to follow a agile waterfall. So it's like a modified agile and waterfall build methodology approach. And this really allows for an evolutionary deployment without sacrificing timeline. So we'll typically follow very traditional phases for our implementation projects of plan, design, build, deploy. So those are usually kind of our 4 main phases. And there's clear milestones and some sign-offs that come with each phase, but we really leave room in our projects for the team to think and try and test and learn, adapt over the course of the project. So when we get through design, we understand this is the design we're moving forward with, that we're going to build against, but we understand that when we're in there and testing during that build phase, we all might have a brilliant idea that comes up for how to take the solution to that next step. And so we like to leave room for that kind of evolution in our projects as well. And the last thing I'd say is with error emission calculations and deploying error solutions in particular, the really critical step is the quality review and the testing of the solution. So we typically recommend doing a full year comparison of data. So after we get through building out the calculations and the solution, we take the prior year's data, put it into the system, and then pull out the calculated emissions and do a side-by-side comparison from the new tool versus whatever your previous processes and looked like, and make sure that the data aligns, or if the data doesn't align, we understand we made a change to methodology, we made a change to approach here, this is why the data is not aligned anymore. So that's a really critical step with the error calculations in particular, just because they're so data heavy, and you really want to make sure all those pieces are in the system correctly. And the only great way to do that is by like a full side-by-side comparison.
Yeah, and it's amazing when we've done that. Just like it is a great way to debug like data feeds, or even just erroneous. I mean, we've seen it as erroneous previous calcs where you pull out, but then you've got to explain it to a regulator, like why going forward, like you said, maybe we switched methodology, or maybe we just fixed things for going forward. So yeah. It's a good step to go through.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even beyond that, we also typically recommend, even like once you go live, running side by side calculations for like even just 1 or 2 periods, whether that's a month or a quarter, just to make sure that you're really, that everything's working smoothly, and the air emissions like are so critical, and you don't want someone to show up on your doorstep and not have the data readily available. So just during that transition phase, doing the side-by-side calculations can help as it can be a good risk mitigation strategy too for these projects.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree on that. It's just like you learn so much of like, wait, this like come into it with when we've integrated in a data feed and then we're still tracking some of the data manually, and it's like, wait, we forgot, the operator's not logging it manually anymore. We've tried to automate everything and
Yeah.
missed the manual piece. So no, it's great. I guess continuing that, are there any like non-obvious challenges with air compliance that companies should be aware of as they go through this digital journey? Like if you were to give advice to somebody like, don't forget about this, you're going to forget about this, or you're not going to think of this. Any recommendations?
So I think looking at the start of the journey, I would say one non-obvious like challenge or recommendation that I have is just getting all the right stakeholders in the room. It's really easy to overlook the role that someone plays in this process, and they might have this whole world of information that you're not aware of that goes into getting you those 2 pieces of data that you ask for annually. So making sure that the right stakeholders are going to be part of the project to implement your solution is really key, and making the time for it too. Like these projects it's hard, right? Because everyone has so much going on. So many demands. So it is important to try to carve out the time to be ready to invest in these conversations and the planning, because planning and having the right conversations up front to digitizing your air emissions will really help make the rest of the process go smoothly. And then I would say the other thing, just once you get going with having a digital or digitizing your air emission calculations, I think just looking at it as a journey, like you use that word, Ryan, journey, and we love to use that word too, because it's not a one and done process. We can do all the quality review in the world, and you're probably going to still find an error somewhere in there. Like these are very hard projects, and it's hard to get them perfect. And so it's important to like go into it with the mindset. And I think a lot of us as environmental professionals have this mindset already, but just it's important to have that mindset that it's a journey. It probably won't be perfect upfront, but you can continue to make improvements and make improvements and continue to drive further efficiencies from the program and from the tool as you continue to evolve it. So maybe not quite a more about the overall process than, but I think that's where people get tripped up, is wanting a one and done. Now I never have to touch it again, and that's not going to be the case.
Come on, Kathryn, we hired you to implement Tapestry solution and we're just done. It should be perfect and we never have to think about this again. And you're right. And aligning expectations early on that it's an iterative process is really, really big. Going back to something where we were talking about at the beginning around sustainability, how can companies tie what they're doing on like air emissions? I have an air permit, I'm collecting all this data around it. How do I effectively tie that to sustainability programs so that I'm not, as somebody was telling me earlier today, even running 2 different spreadsheets, the air emission spreadsheet and the sustainability spreadsheet? How do we tie those together? How do we get better value and even develop a sustainability program from what we're doing today for core compliance around air emissions?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head. Like the two teams need to be talking. If they are separate teams within your organization, they do need to be talking to each other and collaborating, particularly on the data collection front. Like that's where there's so much opportunity for driving efficiency for both programs. So if because oftentimes the data that you need for your air emission calculations, it does overlap with the data that the sustainability team would need for carbon emission calculations and their disclosures. So really collaborating on that data collection. One, so you're not asking people for data twice. No one likes to be bugged for data in the beginning anyways. And so just if you have to now, if two different teams are coming at them for the same data point, that can get frustrating for people. So trying to collaborate on what data do we need for both programs and how can we use a digital solution to really automate that data collection and feed it to both of our programs. So whether or not both programs are fully fully digitized or using the same tools. So we are seeing some, it's really a mixed bag of whether clients are taking the approach of an enterprise solution that does air emission calculations and sustainability, the carbon emission calculations and metrics tracking and reporting versus having different tools for different, more of like point solution tools. So we're seeing a bit of a mixed bag there. But regardless of that approach, you can still leverage a single data collection stream and then use data feeds between the two, if it is two separate systems or one enterprise system, to feed the calculations for both programs. And I think that really gets around to answering that data quality question as well. So there is more scrutiny on the data that's feeding both sets of calculations. And so making sure that we're using the same source data to the extent that it makes sense based on methodologies, and that the data is going through a quality review by the people who are most familiar with the data. All of those things can really help improve both your air emissions program and your sustainability program. So I think that would be the number one thing, like collaborating at least on that data collection piece is going to just improve things for both programs significantly.
Yeah, I agree. Just like you said, nobody likes being asked for data twice, let alone even once of like, can you run all these reports? So no, tying them together is a huge, huge efficiency driver for companies. We've already blown through half an hour. I know we can chat about this for like days on end. But I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing a little bit on the process and things you're seeing and things to consider. Um, Kathryn's contact info is up, but feel free to reach out for anybody on the webinar if you want to follow up with questions or you have specific projects you want help with. So yeah, I really appreciate you being here today, Kathryn. And you or some of the Trinity team also is going to be at our annual summit talking about these on a larger scale in September in San Diego, if anybody wants to join us there, and tying what you're doing on like data collection for environmental to sustainability programs, especially with what's going on with SEC and just more globally around sustainability. So I appreciate everybody for joining us, and we've got a couple upcoming events. We're going to be talking about waste data at the end of this month, and then talking about enforcement litigation on the next Coffee and Compliance webinar series. But thank you for joining us today, Kathryn, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Ryan.